Welcome to today's MediaWorks Masterclass. Today we're going to be covering a topic which keeps coming up in loads and loads of conversations. I feel like that we keep having with clients, prospects, and pretty much actually anybody I seem to bump in who wants to speak to me about where is sort of performance heading in terms of the creative landscape with all the tools that exist, all of the multiple variants that exist out there, and how do we cater for that? So really we want to talk today about skill and influence, not just assets. I think today, we're going to cover, and I've got guests with me. So again, I'll do some introductions. My name is David Norris. I'm the host of the MediaWorks Masterclass and the Chief Operating Officer here at MediaWorks. I've got some distinguished guests with me today. So Paul, would you like to give a bit of an introduction?
I'm Paul Moller, Managing Partner at MediaWorks, and I work across strategy and creative. And so a lot of my life at the moment is exactly this topic.
Yep, perfect. And James?
And then I'm James. I'm paid media director here at MediaWorks. So performance channels and performance creative is very much my wheelhouse.
So for anybody that's joined sort of our masterclasses recently, we follow sort of three real key stages as we go through the masterclass. We talk about why we think the topic's important, and for today that'll cover sort of AI is bringing unique opportunities but is already giving challenges around cut through. That's a big conversation that's happening all of the time, and we're going to give some examples and data around why this is such an important topic. We're then going to go into sort of our frameworks for success, so sharing a little about how we actually harness AI combined with platform choices to create thumb-stopping engagement. Easy for me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Swallowing that one. Right, and then third, we're going to look at implementation and impact. So really focusing on the efficiency payback, so production, media planning, and ROI. Really talking about why it's important, what our frameworks are, and then how we're actually going to think about implementing and driving that impact that organizations are really looking for. So again, for anybody that's joined recently, what you're going to see is we've been utilizing a tool called menti.com as an interactive way that we get insight from you guys on a particular topic. So the way to do that is simply go get out your mobile phone. I hope lots of you have got one. And scan that QR code, and it will take you through to a really very simple format in terms of a survey that we'd like it to complete. I can see that we're up to the 10s already. We're heading towards 20 plus already. And what I'd like it to do is just identify how you use AI and what do you use AI to support. The options there are campaign strategy, writing propositions, creating messaging matrices, creating ad variants, analysing ad performance, and driving campaign optimization. We looked at recent surveys around this and came up with these topics, and we were just really interested to get an insight into sort of your views on it. I can see we're up to 40 respondents already, which is absolutely amazing, by the way, to see. So I guess as we go through that, campaign strategy seems to be fairly heavy. I know we use that quite a lot to inform our campaign strategy in terms of the different tools that we use, Paul.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to come on to it in a later slide, but I think for me, there's kind of helping you organize thinking around strategy. Then obviously, AI, particularly like ChatGPT, is very good at helping you with writing. So, helping you get the words out, maybe frame things in different ways. So good to see lots of people thinking about helping writing propositions. Turning that into messaging matrices is a good one, because that's a pretty time-consuming task that is really kind of follows on from the other two. But for me, it's always the critical bit is knowing what your tone of voice should be and checking that you can't just blindly take the output. And then we're into our kind of ad production side, which is great. And then I think it's quite an interesting one about how much ad performance is being analysed and what kind of comes natively within the platform. So I think that's a really interesting thing. It's interesting to see the dip around the end of that process, but the fact that at the beginning people are well using the tools.
And I think what we do is again, fascinating to see we've had nearly 50 respondents, by the way. It's absolutely amazing to see this move around for us and really interesting insight to get from our live audience. So thank you very much for contributing to that. I think the key thing for me is we think there's a role for AI to play in all of these areas. It's just, I think at the moment, the biggest challenge is understanding how to do that in a structured way and at scale. I think is really interesting. So again, we're going to cover pretty much all of these areas as we go through today, talking about our experience of this. So again, honestly, thank you very much for your contribution. contribution as we go through the session. So I guess, why is it all important? You know, why we sat here talking about Performance Creative 3.0? And I guess the first place to start is linked with the survey that we've just seen, Paul.
Yeah. So latest TechCrunch, big fan of TechCrunch. 87% of creatives and marketeers are now using AI tools in their creative workflows. For me, then, what's interesting is, what does that workflow comprise? So we're going all the way from planning down to campaign optimization, and I think we should be asking ourselves questions about how it can help at each stage.
Yeah.
But, you know, the tide has well and truly turned.
Yeah.
We know, and we've spoken about, and James has spoken about in previous masterclasses, you know, things like Google Andromeda coming along. 100% of digital platforms are now got some form of AI.
Yeah, AI is everywhere. Andromeda is just the latest. LinkedIn's also looking at how they can use AI to focus on that creative personalization and optimization. Digital platforms have been doing it for a while, but we're really seeing it start to ramp up, and it is quite exciting with the backdrop of the wider AI sphere. I don't know that we're seeing going on.
Yeah.
And I think my favourite phrase this week is, AI is a bit too big now, because we need to start separating it out.
Yeah.
But all of this is all relates together, which is what's interesting.
Yeah, and look, we're talking about platforms. What I would say is Microsoft's annual conference on all things digital is today. And then what we've got is Google's is tomorrow.
Google's is tomorrow, yeah.
So we've got Google Marketing Live tomorrow. Honestly, I was thinking this when we were talking about it yesterday, James, is if I have £1 for every time AI is mentioned in those conferences, I think I'd be able to pay for a holiday by the end of the couple of days.
Don't make it a drinking game.
It'd be absolutely disastrous for me, James. So, Andromeda, I think, is a really good place to start. A lot of our clients have been engaging with this as a new way of doing things.
Yeah, I think Andromeda's maybe the single biggest change that Meta has made in the last couple of years. And really, what it boils down to is it's moved from like a very audience-first optimization approach to being much more focused on creative first for audience optimization. It's the recommendations are less about granular structure. It's now about creative variety and scale, and allowing the platform to identify signals within users and deliver creative that best fits them in placements that sort of best fit them. So it's in the last 6 months, it is changing how we're seeing it. I think we were just talking to a client yesterday. In fact, we rolled out creative at scale for them, and the CPC dropped by about 50%. And I think it was close to a 300% increase in click-through rates. So applying some of the best practices that we're going to talk about today definitely works.
Yeah, and there you go. That's just kind of backing up. I mean, Adobe's done research, but, you know, using, you know, they specifically looked at generative AI ad variants, and we'll talk about, you know, how does AI help do the heavy lifting. But to James's point, we're seeing this, not AI, not Adobe's data, we're seeing it out in the field right now, driving these kind of improvements.
Yeah.
Right, so I think, you know, one of the things that sparked the conversation was and how this could extend beyond probably maybe some stuff that we've already talked about. Is a new piece of research and that Google kind of distributed a couple of weeks ago on their Think with Google platform, and they were talking about the difference between inelastic platforms and elastic platforms, and it's really about how do you make things thumb-stopping. And I mean, Google have done the data, so maybe they have a slight bit of bias, but for platforms like YouTube, they're describing these as elastic platforms, whereby you got longer with your audience before they've got the opportunity to scroll past with their thumb. But with the inelastic platforms, you really got to double down on how you're going to grab that attention. And I think for what was interesting for me about this is this poses challenges and opportunities that whether you're creative then has to intrinsically link into your media planning. You know, me and James spend a lot of time talking to each other, so you know, you can't just say, here's our creative, go and put it on the platform. Yeah. So you've now got to think about how the two really come together. Mm-hmm. And for me, all of this ties into that point about that slide on Andromeda. It says creative is now your primary lever for performance.
Yeah.
And I think it's starting to this new way of thinking that's going to be really, really important for everyone.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think in past masterclass that we've talked about how creative is often cited as the number one thing that leads to like whether a campaign is successful or whether an ad is picked up and achieves that cut through. And I think what's happened is the platforms have really taken that. So we always were saying creative's actually more important than, for example, targeting or tracking. But it's like actually now the platforms are driving us to think like that, whereas before we would start with no, it's an audience, it's targeting, and then it's like we create the creative on the back of that. And I'm not saying that we still don't follow that process, but I definitely we're having to think about things in a slightly different way, particularly from performance and an optimization perspective. So I think there's so much going on in this space which leads us to have that conversation.
And this is the follow-up thing, that on that thing with Google, they're now saying that we used to have this thing, we used to talk about you've got 3.7 seconds to grab people's attention, and then that went down to 2.5. Google have now said this has gone down to 1.5 seconds, and they're using this phrase, fluent brand asset. That means that your audience have got to be fluent with your brand asset, and this goes back to your Byron Sharp thinking, it goes back to imprinting your brand, and really you've got 1.5 seconds where you've got to get that over, and having a brand that people recognise has done half the heavy lifting before in that 1.5 seconds. So it really ups the ante on making sure that your ads are carrying your kind of brand image. It doesn't mean to say it's got to have a logo slapped across the middle of it, but something about it has got to be then say, okay, this is from brand X.
So I guess when we look at that, like, again, I think we've probably justified why we're here talking about it. And I think we've seen from the data that people shared with us, again, thank you very much for completing the survey. We've seen that people are already out there in the wild, if you like, utilising this technology. And I think, look, that's where we were as an organisation. We were trying it in pockets and seeing what worked over the last 18 months. But we've definitely now talking about what does that framework for success look like? So how do we bring structure to all of these levers that you can pull, to use your expression, Paul, in a world where there's so much going on? Is like, where do you actually utilize AI to, in essence, drive efficiencies or ultimately drive effectiveness is what we're looking at. So I think for us, we talk about sort of those three core pillars. So I think first it starts with sort of platform choice. So to your point, Paul, around like elastic, balancing elastic versus inelastic platforms is critical to balance reach and engagement. So it's about understanding sort of where does it all fit? And actually, when you're thinking about your media plans, like where are you prepared to play and where are you not prepared to play? I still think it's a really important conversation to be had. Like, we're in a world where people don't have infinite budgets. We're all making choices all the time about what not to do as much as we are about what to do. And I think, like, again, creative's the same, right? Is you can't create creative for every single platform and expect it to have the same amount of impact. There are going to be different areas that we win and lose in. So again, we'll look at that. You then talk about using generative AI to build out campaign scale. So again, we've talked like a massive amount of this recently with some of our clients who are producing that creative at scale, multiple audiences, multiple messages going out in a very tailored, targeted, personalized way. How do you actually do that in terms of like, what does that look like in terms of things like ad production? Because it's very easy to talk about the concept of it, but in reality, how does it actually play out? And then I think for us, we talk about then focusing on what your core brand assets are. So again, brand early, brand often, and keep a core set of brand assets. And then ultimately, you try and tell a story, like what are we trying to show people that then takes them through that journey. So we're going to go through each of these in a bit more detail as we go through now. So planning platform mix, James. I think it's really important, isn't it, in terms of that selection that we look at from the outset?
Yeah, so this concept of elastic and inelastic platforms is really about that attention economy, and it's about whether or not we've got the fast scrolls, like your feed-based placements, your basic display where people are sort of scrolling past that. Really, that is about that's where Paul says there's like 1.5 seconds to grab someone's attention, because people are like, the platforms are designed to keep you scrolling as quickly as possible. So we need to think about not just the platforms that we're choosing, but also the placement control that we're choosing. And really we want to make a balance between some with sort of short-term impact and really allow us to sort of get that scale and coverage of rapid branding. With the more elastic channels where we can tell a little bit more of a story, we can try and get user buy-in, generate emotive engagement, and really build that long-term brand equity that we're trying to generate. So really, it's about a balance, I think, and your creative strategy sort of comes from that. I think, with like Binier and Fields, long and short of it, like you want to have long-term brand building alongside your short-term brand building. Yeah. So you just need to plan your channels accordingly. Depending on what you need to do first, you can look at this, and there is a little bit of a framework there. But essentially, it's your longer form video channels that have the most elasticity, and you're able to do the most with, because user attention sort of there's not an attention recession, which is one of the phrases that Google sort of used there. So it's about building a balance, and it'll depend on where your brand sits as to what you do. But do think about platform placement within platform, and then the creative design feeds that whole strategy.
Yeah, and I think this, for me, is one of the sessions that pulls together a lot of topics we've covered before, whether we were talking about the role of creative in terms of achieving cut through, or whether we were talking about sort of how all of the channels themselves are now talking about being like full funnel solutions, etc. And what does that actually mean? I feel like this gives us the opportunity to sort of tie all of those things together, and I think it's a nicer way to consider it. So then you start to get into, how do we actually do that in terms of the creative production piece, Paul?
And so for me, this is the really cool stuff. I mean, no disrespect for that last slide. I think that last slide is brilliant, because there's so many ways that you can lay out different channels in different quadrants. But I think that this elastic thing kind of simplifies that thinking.
Yeah.
Right. So that's great. How do we at MediaWorks now approach all of this? So you know, we're using a lot of agentic AI that we've developed ourselves, and you know, but you're following a pretty similar process to the world before AI. So looking at audience insight, going into campaign planning and creative production. But now what we can do is that we can use AI to power all of this. So when we're looking at audience insights, we can now delve into way bigger data sets. We can automate the grabbing of that data to kind of pull it into deeper insights, more granular insights into audiences. That can now feed in straight from the insight into our campaign planning. So it doesn't rule out the need for James's team. They're still looking at some channel choices, but that will have been informed a little bit from the insight, because we've got channel choices in our insight. In our campaign planning now, we've got enormous spreadsheets that allow us to cover many different formats. We can get many different stages of a customer journey, and then we've got all the different formats that we could be in across that, and we can start populating all of those kind of campaign plans again using agentic AI, and then really harnessing the end bit is using tools like Canva or Figma. We're using a lot of Figma, where you can then absolutely connect your spreadsheet or your databases straight up to templates to then generate ads at scale, including things like image generation. If you've got an image that the sky's cut off a little bit, well, guess what? Figma can extend the sky for you. You know? So all through that process, we've got this kind of running really well now. And just looking at the bottom, we're using a lot of Claude. Microsoft 365 is kind of enabling new things, and then plugging it into the different creative production platforms is really important. So for me, this is a really important kind of shift, because we've now got our creative production and planning intrinsically locked in with the media planning, and that makes for efficiency, impact, everything.
And I think this is in lots of ways the crux of what we've been talking to a lot of clients about, because clients are sat going, right, we get that we can get more audience insights. We know that we need to be more targeted and tailored to actually drive the AI and the machine learning that takes place in the platforms. But actually then they take a step back and go, but how do we feed that? Like, how do we keep the machine fed in a really efficient, effective way? Because you're having to create a lot more asset variance, etc., to test and learn, etc. And I think for me, this is a beautiful way to actually summarize that and talk people through that process in a world where, like, the platforms are becoming more asset hungry. How do you keep it actually fed? I think is a nice way to put it. And again, on this, we were talking then, Paul, about how do you actually then, in the world where, what did you call it? Attention recession.
Attention recession.
I love it. In a world where we're dealing with attention recession, like, how do you actually achieve?
I was just looking for a great example of an ad that does everything in the first 1.5 seconds. And I appreciate this is Adidas and Samuel L. Jackson, but that's the opening frame at the top on the main YouTube ad. So the Adidas, because of Adidas, it just needs to show you the 3 stripes on his arm. and that you know it's an Adidas ad. He starts a narrative. The first thing that you hear is, "I was racking my brains trying to piece it all together." Well, you're not going to not want to know what happened next.
Yeah.
And then as you go looking through the ad library for Adidas, you have so many different variants that have been tailored to the different platforms that, again, they will have used, they will have done a lot of this kind of manually, but they will have done AI production techniques as well, just to get the scale of this. But I think that's a great example. But on the next slide, we do accept that not everyone is Adidas.
Yeah, because we dealt with this yesterday. We started talking to a client of ours yesterday about this, who are big brand in their own space, to be fair, but turned around to us and went, yeah, but it's all right if you're Adidas and it's all right if you've got Samuel Jackson. So we wanted to just then share a bit about, if you're not Adidas, how do you grab that attention?
Remember the three stripes bit, because every brand has got something like that, and if you don't, you need something like that, because that is a shorthand to your brand. Thumb stopping stuff, there are loads and loads of different techniques, from kind of using myth versus fact, kind of flowcharts to help you self-diagnose things, crossed out problems. You see a lot of these things within campaigns at the moment, and some of them translate to kind of out of home quite well. But all of these are very, very powerful ways of getting people to stop in the feed, because you're engaging them immediately with a question that kind of leads on to almost a mini story that then your brand is providing the solution for. So there's a lot of techniques that are being used at the moment that, if you're not Adidas, all of these work well, and all of these are examples for brands that are nowhere near the scale of recognition that Adidas have.
So with that in mind, and I know we talk about sort of, we always like to give something away to those people that have signed up and want to learn more about something. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to offer a free creative impact audit. What that'll tell you is, do your ads that you're currently running currently pass the 1.5 second thumb stopper test is really important. We'll then look at how your campaigns are impacting key elements of your digital presence. We'll then benchmark your performance versus two competitors, and we'll also look at recommendations on what you should do next to boost your performance. So again, we'll share a link in the chat. It's probably already there. It's probably already been shared. If you're listening on Catch Up or on a podcast or any of the popular channels which people engage with, post masterclass, then again, just follow all the links that are available and will be shared. Post this to ask for your creative impact audit. And it's really an opportunity for us to showcase sort of what we're seeing in your assets versus your competitors across a number of key channels. So I think there's a real opportunity there to dig a bit deeper into your specific scenario. So I guess then, in a final stage, we want to talk about implementation and impact. So again, James, I'll come to you for this. In terms of the steps that we go through when we're talking about implementation and impact, what's step one?
Yeah, I think step one, as it has been, and we've said in many of these sessions, it's really understanding your audience and starting there. Every brand has a different personas that they're going after, and understanding how those users operate, which channels they prefer, what type of content they're interested in, what are those key moments or key questions that they're asking, gives you a lot of insight to sort of help design that initial media plan, but also the creative strategy that follows it. We use platforms like GWI to help do this, but there's lots of ways and to understand the audience profile. Once you've got that, then you need to start thinking about what are we trying to do, the objective, and how do we layer in both elastic and inelastic channels so that we've got that short-term brand recognition that gives us reach, scale, and sort of performance exposure, along with longer-term brand building from our sort of storytelling and those more elastic channels that can capture attention and take users on a bit of a journey. And once we've got that plan together, then it's about making sure that we've got the creative brief to fit each, making sure that the channel assets suit the placements that we're planning to put them on, making sure that we've got enough variety and we've got a testing framework within that, so we can take something, so that we can take some insights and continue to develop off the back of it. And then really it's about sort of that QA process and that constant development at the end.
Then at stage two, sort of, Paul, we build agentic and production automation capability.
Yeah, I mean, and this is kind of an overview of the approach we're taking at the moment. So you're looking for data-heavy, repetitive tasks. They lend themselves very well to, agentic AI. I think, you know, really be clear where you need to direct the AI, and things like tone of voice, as I said right at the start of the session today, is an area where AI can get it completely wrong. So it's just kind of making sure you know where you need to give the direction. Link the media planning and creative process, as we've said. And then the final bit about QA, ensure a human QA is present at all the critical stages. You know, that last point on James's previous side as well, you know, I'm a big fan of getting the media team to look at the ads as well, and you know, just kind of, everyone's going to have a different perspective on whether they think it's a good ad or not, and whether it lands the brand, whether it's got a great message, whether it's been produced well, whether it's going to grab attention. But your point about being fit for platform is a perfect example of where the media team can really influence creative.
Yeah, and I think for me, like, really what we're talking about is building in those feedback loops. And I think in this world, it's so important, because we've talked all throughout this masterclass about how do you get things right at scale. If you don't have those feedback loops and you don't build out this in a systematic way where you are iterating and it is test and learn, you potentially building it out incorrectly at scale, which creates a whole other series of problems in there. So I think it's so important that you do have that human element. We're not saying let AI run wild here. There's some of the worst examples, and we could have put some shocking outputs that we've actually observed in the space up as examples here.
Yeah, I think that, like, this is where, because the platforms obviously do a lot of creative variation, can do a lot of that for you, but that QA element is the bit that they don't. If you let Google go off and create images for you and generate scale there, you're losing that element, and that element is the part that ensures that you bring it all back to the original strategy. And that's why where we're using it, we're linking everything together, but having a human sort of guide and understand and lead that strategy all the way through.
So important. And then I guess double down on brand toolkits and narrative. Like, this is so important.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
Get the inputs wrong. It's a disaster.
Yeah. So, you know, what are your three stripes? You know, define your core brand distinctive assets. Make sure you know how they can be deployed across different formats as well. But, you know, how's it going to work on a static image? How does it work in a video? You know, and any other formats. The critical bit for the creative team nowadays is then exploring how you're baking your distinctive brand assets into the templates that you're going to make. So, you know, central to that kind of AI, you know, production at scale is using templates. How many templates do you need? How is the brand going to be you know, put into those templates? Because that is a very good way of ensuring that you're making your ads fit for platform, and that you've got your 1.5 second you know, impact at the beginning of the ad. And then I think that the final part for me, and it's something that I say to the creative team all the time, is like, every ad can be a story. I mean, not a Google shopping ad where you're seeing a product, but you know, everything should be, you know, asking you a question and intriguing you to know what the solution is or what's going to be next in that. So yeah, think about the Adidas example, but also remember that you can write very, very small stories in, you know, in a couple of sentences, and that's enough to make people more interested and start to engage with what you say.
I would even say, to be honest, even in a shopping ad, what I'd say is you are telling somewhat of a story, because you're hitting people with whether it's a discounted product, what the size is, key specification. All of that's a way that people are consuming information in a very quick format.
Yeah.
I guess that leads us on to closing thoughts. I guess what we're saying here is think about platform impact, really understand the platforms, plus being able to deliver creative variance at scale, plus in terms of new production thinking, really is what we're talking about when we talk about Performance Creative 3.0. We've done a 2.0, I think, about 12 months ago. We're now up to 3.0 because this is moving really quickly. Platforms are moving quickly, technology is moving quickly. So I think if I was anybody out there right now listening to this session, these are the three things I would be thinking about as we take away. And I guess the three takeaways would be sort of platform and format choice is critical to deliver high impact campaigns. AI in platforms offers huge new potential for creative variation. And then you've got to sort of audit your campaigns for two factors. Does your brand impact in the first 1.5 seconds? If it doesn't, then you probably want to think about that. And then do you have enough creative variation to maximize platform AI? Again, we've talked about ways you can do that at scale as we've gone through today. So really for me, we've hopefully covered these topics off, and you've taken a lot from today's session. And what I'd like to say is thank you very much to James, thanks very much to Paul, thanks very much for everybody in the audience who's engaged with this session and contributed to the survey. It's really interesting to always get our audience insights as part of that. And thank you very much for joining us on another MediaWorks Masterclass. Really look forward to seeing you at the next MediaWorks Masterclass. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.